The glow of the computer screen was the only light in the small, cluttered apartment. Every night, long after the city outside had fallen quiet, the pale blue reflection danced across her face as she scrolled through messages, posts, and comments that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. At first, they were subtle, almost easy to dismiss. An anonymous comment that seemed too pointed, an email from a stranger that referenced a place she had just been. She told herself it was coincidence, bad luck, or maybe just her imagination, but soon the pattern became impossible to ignore. Whoever it was knew her routines, her friends, even the sound of her voice. They hid behind usernames and blank profile pictures, an unseen presence that was somehow closer to her than anyone she actually knew. The unease crept into her daily life. She began locking her door twice, glancing behind her as she walked home, and deleting messages without daring to reply. But the silence did not stop the intruder. The stalker became bolder. A voicemail arrived one morning with a recording of her own conversation from the night before. A private photograph she had never shared appeared in her inbox. It was no longer about the internet. It was her life that had been breached, her privacy shattered, her reality invaded. Fear gave way to anger, and anger turned to resolve. She decided she would not wait to be hunted anymore. It began with nights spent researching digital footprints, the trails people unknowingly left across forums, networks, and servers. She learned to trace IP addresses, to map anonymous accounts to devices, and to weave connections between fragments of data scattered across platforms. What once felt like chaos began to look like a puzzle. She saw the same handle appear in a gaming forum, a marketplace, and then a barely active blog that had a single name signed at the bottom. It was common, unremarkable, but it was something. She clung to it like a loose thread and began pulling. Every new clue led deeper into the mind of the person tormenting her. They had been watching her long before she realized, building a profile from scraps of information she had left online over years, an old post about her favorite cafe, a tagged location from a vacation, even the way she spelled certain words. It was obsession woven with methodical precision. And yet, in their arrogance, they had overlooked something. Their network of false accounts all looped back to a single point, an email address tied to an ancient forum post under their real name. When she finally saw the face behind the mask, it was not what she expected. It wasn't a stranger lurking in the shadows of some distant city, but someone she had once known, someone who had walked through her life with a smile. The betrayal was sharp, crueler than the stalking itself. Memories flooded back. The casual conversations, the moments of laughter, the times she had shared pieces of herself freely, never knowing they were being gathered and hoarded for a darker purpose. She did not confront him in person. Instead, she prepared carefully, gathering every message, every file, every timestamp into a folder that told the story in undeniable detail. With steady hands, she delivered it all to those who could act where she could not. The silence that followed was different from before. It was not the silence of fear, but of a storm waiting to break. And when it did, it was swift. His world collapsed in the same way he had tried to collapse hers, connections severed, doors closed, a reputation shredded under the weight of his own actions. Still, victory did not feel clean. Even after he was unmasked and stripped of his power, the shadows he had cast lingered. Every notification, every ping of her phone, still carried a trace of dread. Yet beneath it all was something stronger. The knowledge that she had faced him, not by hiding but by learning, resisting, and turning his own tools against him. The digital haunt had ended, but the scars remained, silent reminders carved into her routines. She no longer trusted as freely, no longer lived online without caution. But she carried with her the fire of survival and the certainty that masks, no matter how carefully crafted, always slip. The shadows of the ordeal did not leave her easily. Even after his arrest, even after the courts had spoken and the headlines had briefly burned his name into the public eye, she could not shake the feeling that he was still there, lurking somewhere just beyond the glow of her screen. Trauma has a way of programming itself into the mind, leaving behind fragments of dread that reappear in the smallest moments, a knock on the door, the hum of a router rebooting, the flicker of a pop-up notification. She had unmasked her tormentor, but the ghost of his presence haunted her in subtler ways. The nights were the hardest. She would sit in bed, phone dark on the nightstand, laptop shut tight, and still feel the weight of eyes on her. In those hours, the city outside seemed complicit in her unease, the streetlights flickering like warnings, the muted sounds of cars on the asphalt like whispers of pursuit. She had once loved the solitude of the night, the way it made her feel alone but safe, cocooned in silence. Now, solitude had turned into exposure. The quiet did not comfort her anymore. It accused her, reminding her of the messages that had arrived at 3 a.m., always when the world was asleep. But there was another part of her, a harder, sharper edge, forged by the fire of what she had endured. Fear had carved her into someone new, someone who no longer trusted digital anonymity as something unbreakable. She had stared into the abyss of the internet's faceless cruelty and dragged a name, a face, and a life out of it. And once you had done that, once you had cracked through the armor of invisibility, something inside you changed. She could not go back to being who she was before. She began to watch others online with the same precision she had once reserved for defending herself. Not obsessively, but carefully. A friend's casual oversharing, a stranger's reckless posting, each one became a puzzle she could solve. She started to recognize how patterns formed, how identities slipped through cracks. It was no longer about her own safety alone. It became about seeing the web of vulnerability that surrounded everyone. She knew too well how easy it was for someone with enough malice and patience to twist those threads into a snare. And so she kept digging. Not into him, he was finished, but into the systems, the networks, the hidden places where predators flourished. Late at night, when the fear clawed too loudly at her chest, she would channel it into searches, into tracking forums and reading case studies, into building a quiet arsenal of knowledge. If she was haunted, she would turn the haunting into fuel. She began leaving breadcrumbs for others, anonymous warnings posted in obscure corners of the internet, hints that someone was watching the watchers. In time, she understood something chilling. The man who had tormented her was not exceptional. He was not even particularly clever. He was simply determined and willing to hide in the folds of technology that most people never thought to question. And if there was one of him, there were others, many others, each wearing their own mask, each convinced they were untouchable. The thought no longer paralyzed her. Instead, it sharpened her purpose. She had unmasked one, and she could do it again. She would not wait for another shadow to crawl into her life. She would go hunting in the dark places where they lived, exposing them one by one, tearing their illusions of invisibility apart. What had begun as survival was becoming something else, something closer to vengeance, though not in the crude, personal sense. This was a war of exposure. The same anonymity that had been weaponized against her would become her weapon in return. And though she never said it aloud, deep down she knew, she had become the thing her stalker feared most. A presence he could not see, a shadow that could reach into the private places of his life and strip him bare. The cyberstalker had created his own nemesis, and she wore no mask at all. Her transformation was not sudden. It unfolded slowly, like code running silently in the background, unnoticed until its effects became undeniable. At first, she convinced herself that she was only learning for protection. She read forums dedicated to cybersecurity, enrolled quietly in online courses, and practiced tracing networks late into the night. But soon, protection became power. She no longer flinched when her screen lit up. Instead, her fingers twitched with anticipation. Where once there had been only fear, there was now an unshakable hunger to see behind the curtains that others pulled so tightly closed. The internet, she realized, was not a vast open field but a labyrinth, with endless tunnels and hidden doors. Ordinary people wandered through only the lit corridors, social media feeds, online shopping, the bright, curated walls of the web. But beyond those walls lay shadows thick with watchers and hunters. That was where he had come from. That was where others like him thrived. And she had learned to follow them. Her first encounter after his downfall was accidental. Or at least it felt that way. A thread in a forgotten forum caught her attention. A man bragging about keeping tabs on his ex, speaking in smug, cryptic tones about how easy it was to break into her accounts. It made her stomach twist in recognition, the same arrogance, the same smug certainty that no one could touch him. She traced his words, followed the trail of usernames he recycled, each one carrying a trace of him. It was like following footprints through the dark. Within days, she had an address, a real name, and proof that his boasts were not just fantasies. She sat there staring at the evidence, her heart pounding. She could send it to the police, drop it anonymously, and walk away. That would have been the sensible thing, the safe thing. But she hesitated. She thought of the girl at the other end of his obsession, unaware of how deep the hooks had already gone, and something inside her hardened. If she stopped here, if she gave away her power, she would always wonder if it had been enough. So she acted. Quietly, carefully, she sent a message, not to him, but to her, the woman he was stalking. It contained no details that could reveal who she was, only a warning and evidence to prove it. Hours later, she saw the forum account go dark. A day later, the police had been notified. She had burned his mask away, left him naked in the light. The rush that followed terrified her. It was not joy exactly, but something close, a deep, vibrating sense of justice, of control. She had turned the tables, and the taste of it was intoxicating. From then on, she did not stop. She refined her methods, building identities within identities, each one giving her access to new corners of the labyrinth. She never revealed her true self, not even a flicker. To those who thought themselves invisible, she became an invisible force of her own, always a step ahead, always watching. Word began to spread in whispers, strange rumors on obscure boards, of accounts that vanished overnight, of stalkers who found their private details posted where they never wanted them to be, of predators who suddenly went silent after years of boasting. But the deeper she went, the more she realized how endless the darkness truly was. For every one she unmasked, two more seemed to emerge, hidden behind layers of false names and encrypted networks. It was a hydra of obsession and malice, always regrowing heads. And in chasing them, she began to wonder what she was becoming. Her life outside the screen grew thin, stretched. Friends drifted, jobs felt hollow. Even her apartment seemed less like a home and more like a bunker. Her world shrank until the only space that mattered was the glowing labyrinth of her monitors, the pulse of data moving across them like blood through veins. She told herself it was purpose.